What is happening? Steve Mayeda, the Daily Awesome Podcast, the podcast on men's development. And we are talking about depression, anxiety, being bipolar, even suicidal thinking, all these things. How do we pop ourselves out of depression? How do we get into depression? What causes it? And so many different things. Obviously, a huge topic, but more importantly, how do we get to a functioning, happy place where this doesn't plague our lives anymore? And it's a complex answer and a tough thing, and you might not like all of it. But I'm going to tell you what works. I'm going to tell you what works with my groups and how a lot of us have had struggles with this and been able to pop out of it. So before we get into that, this is the Daily Awesome Podcast. What it is a running dialogue of masculinity. In fact, we're on our Men's Development Excellence call. It's a membership that we have where guys come in from all around the world. It's 2 a.m. here in Austin, Texas. There's dudes from Beirut. There's dudes from Malaysia. There's guys obviously in all of the Americas on this call, but it's a beautiful bonding experience, and it's actually gone on for 6 hours tonight. It started at 8 p.m. Austin time on the 26th of July, and now it's the 27th. Crazy. But how this started out is we were talking about depression. We were talking about it, and actually before I jump into that, if you guys like this, man, click the free stuff link down below. Get involved in our communities. There's free communities. There's paid communities. Learn about them. Join our community. That's why we do this. We do this to open up the door to men. I don't do this to advertise and look cool or whatever. I do this because this is my business, to have communities of men. You can come in at the free level. There's paid levels too. Learn about it. Benefit yourself. Get in a group. It's one of the most important things you can do as a man. And this call proves it. So one of the things is actually the 26th of July is my clean date. It's a day where I stopped using drugs and alcohol, and I've lived a life of, I've OD'd multiple times. I've wanted to kill myself multiple times. I've been depressed. Even earlier today, on the 26th in the morning, I went through a moment of like some severe anger. I was pissed. Like I get in different moods where I don't feel my best, but I'm way better than I used to be in all these different things. And so many coaches refuse to admit that, but it's a huge part of my life and a huge part of my story, and literally one of the best things about myself. You're talking to somebody here that for probably 4 years of my life, at least 5 days out of the week, I took enough pills or drank enough booze to go, I hope I don't wake up because I don't want to be hungover. It wasn't that I wanted to kill myself. It wasn't that I was trying to kill myself, but life sucked. Nothing worked for me. No family, no friends, people fucking screwing you over, the girlfriend left, whatever. And I'm stuck alone in the smallest room in the house, hoarding, counting my shit and wanting more. And that's one of those things when you're a heavy drug user, heavy drinker, or a big time person in addiction, you experience those things. And when you take all that stuff away and you hit enough of a bottom and you start cleaning up your life, man, where I did. And my story is that I originally went to rehab when I was 17, and I was actually trying to kill myself at that point. I got clean for a little bit when I was 30 and still living that way, when I was 28 and still living that way and had even more baggage. Man, the depression, the anxiety, the amount of dual diagnosis and different things that come into play, where dual diagnosis means you have the struggle with addiction, but also you may have some form of depression, or you're bipolar, or some people have schizophrenia and so on, that all these things, man, come into play. It's just crazy. And nothing causes more mental illness or amplifies some problem that you already have than isolation and solitude. And so many of us, when we're in that sort of pain, reach for it. Now, some of the people haven't had experiences like me, and maybe you haven't, but so many guys that are a part of our boards talk about like, I've contemplated suicide. There's times in my life where I've been very depressed. When I get depressed, I can't snap myself out of it. Sometimes it lasts 4 days, sometimes it lasts months, but it's impossible to think that it's ever going to get better. And that's one of those dangerous points that we get into, especially if we're alone, where we start making decisions and choices that this is something that is not going to get better. There's no point in me doing anything. Why leave the house? Why try? Why have ambition? You can't even get there. And how the brain works, or how they theorize through the different neuroscience and so on, is the brain actually is shutting down areas that you need for motivation and so on, just because of the either chemical imbalance or the way that your brain's wired, or perhaps the way that you wired it with the way you live. Either way, you're feeling that now, and either way, you can get out of it. One of the things that I also want to say is that man, there's no shame in reaching out for help with a therapist or psychologist or psychiatrist. And there's no shame on getting medication by an experienced psychiatrist or an experienced therapist that works through some sort of psychiatrist or an MD to prescribe you something. There's no shame in that if you need it, but also be careful with it. And one thing about especially antipsychotic medication, and man, I probably shouldn't be saying this because I'm not a doctor, but you need to be very careful with it, knowing that you should not, or you should know what you can take for the rest of your life, or what if you take for a long term will have major side effects, because getting off those medications is very, 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 very difficult. In fact, hold on one second. I'm going to pop in here to the guys. Guys, I'm doing a recording thing and I see that you guys are a little bit stagnant on the call, but we're talking about depression and all these different things that's going in. So when we get in that depressed mode and we're trapped in it and we think that things do not get better, that because it's impossible, if I slip into it, or if I slip into a moment of anger like I was at earlier today, I feel justified in that anger. I feel that I need to do that anger. I feel that doing it is actually a good thing and I don't see anything wrong with it. I feel that it's my expression. And when we get into that state, that's how we think. And that really is it. An angry person is never wrong, at least to themselves. So for myself, I was in that mode and I caught myself. I'm like, man, I've gotten angry at 3 or 4 things already today and it's only like 2 hours into it. And, I'm never in a good place when this is happening. So for myself in that situation, I stop. But when we're depressed and we have that, as Sylvia Plath said, the bell jar put over our head, and it seems like there's a dome or life is taken out, or the tone is taken out of life, or we just have a muteness or a numbness to the world and no meaning, and this true apathy that comes into play, that is one of those things where it gets dangerous in the sense that we isolate. When we isolate, our mind starts telling us a game plan of life, of doing things, which means that we aren't going to do anything, that there would be no point in it, and that we are worthless, or, the self-pity gets bigger and bigger and greater within ourselves. And one thing that you need to know, just like with the anger, I had to force myself to stop. And I talked about in a previous podcast, the frozen lake. You don't keep walking, you don't go left, you don't go right, you don't do some fancy shit, you stop. You slowly and very carefully walk backwards until you get to safe ground. The safe ground of where you get with depression will come up to these things. 1, pick up the phone. Always be in the habit of calling people. I tell this with my sponsees in recovery all the time, is that one of the first things that you're going to do is you're going to do some reading, you're going to do some exercise, but I want you to call 5 people in recovery a day. I don't care if it's just that you say like, hey, this is Steve, and my sponsor told me to call you or whatever, or call somebody and blah, blah, blah. I'm just doing it. How are you doing? And the person might even be annoyed by you. The reason why I want those guys to do that is there's so much volatility in even long-term recovery, but especially early on in recovery, that's so emotional that at some point very soon, you're going to need to pick up the phone and call somebody because it's going to be a goddamn emergency. The guys that aren't disciplined with calling 5 people a day they won't be able to make that decision, make the call. It'll feel awkward. The people that are going to be like, fuck, man, this just happened to my uncle, or this emergency happened in life, or blah, 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 blah. Man, I'm going to pick up the phone and I'm going to, call somebody just because I'm used to checking in with like Jim on a day-to-day basis of where I'm at, even if it annoys him. That is going to save your ass. There's something about that outreach of humanity, of understanding, of sharing your pain, which you think even sharing it would just make you feel more depressed, that actually cuts it in half. It lessens the pain. Community is such an important thing. We forget we are social animals. All of our evolution was dependent on us being in tribes. We weren't loners. We weren't people that went off and were able to sustain life with just one person. We desperately needed people. It was part of our survival mechanism. And one of the most healing things is being able to plug into a social network where you can be heard, where your feelings have worth. They have whatever, man, just pick up the phone. You don't even need to know why. That is such an important thing when we get into depression. The other thing is that you need to get out of the house. You need to be influenced by the surroundings of the world which you can't control, rather than the walls of your room that control you. The walls come in, things get tighter, and it's harder and harder to just pick up the keys, open up the door, and set your feet outside. It's one of those tough things that we don't want to do. But one of the most interesting things that happens when we enter into or well, at least the outside world. If we live in a city and we walk down the sidewalk, the world works with us in a different way. What's interesting is if we can ever walk in nature, it's even more interesting. When we, man, this is so very, very, very true for me. But even if you try it for yourself, if we walk around in a neighborhood, there's a consistency, there's something that we can memorize. There's trails and set paths and a uniformity of the different houses or buildings that we're around. When we're in nature and we go off hiking, even if we're on a consistent path that we're on, nature is so random, or usually, I mean, if you go too much of a consistent path, but nature is so random that its differences, even though you're traveling less ground, will feel like it's more because it's different. You can't predict it. So many things move around and so many things are augmented in different ways that it's harder for your brain to make attachments to. The beauty of this is that, man, I've had this happen so many times because I'm a nature guy that goes and walks around. But even if you're not, get out of the house, get some sun, get some nighttime fresh air, get some influence from the outside, be a part of the world rather than your world. Very, very important. But so many times I've been depressed or in a place in a bad headspace, an angry headspace or whatever, and I go out in the world and I go out in nature. Immediately, one of the things that starts to happen, and this has happened so much, I've given it so much thought, so much writing, and so much just different takes on it, of just being out in the world, is that, man, my sadness, my pain, my depression in nature is still there, but it has less of a meaning where it implodes inside me. And it's almost just like, oh, well, this is a day where I'm depressed and the world works around me. And this interesting phenomenon starts to take place. The third thing that is so important for you to do is when you get depressed is be around people. So the first thing was picking up the phone and calling. That's key. Second thing is go out in the world and go out in the world and experience the world that influences you rather than your world growing and getting bigger inside of you. The third thing is going around and be a part of people. That is so important. Like I said, we're social animals. And when we can be around people in that environment, it's key. And I know, it's probably the funny thing is I'll watch a lot of YouTube videos on how to, and you might be watching this on like how to not be depressed. And you're like, fuck, these are pretty simple, self-explanatory, different things. But the fucking thing is man, you've got to do it. You're dealing with somebody. And part of one of the great things about our stories is that I have had this exist in my life to high degrees, to massive degrees, to the point where I remember swallowing all the different pills that I took when I was dying. And I remember actually tripping out when I was starting to go through that death mode. And I remember, making sure my little note and all that stuff was in place. So all the people that, that I didn't like would know that, why I was fucking dying or something. I remember all of that. I remember that as an active choice in my life. And I remember also being in the hospital and getting my stomach pumped and, oh man, getting the fucking charcoal down your throat, and also being hospitalized in a coma or coming out of a coma after all of that, after 7 days. It was crazy, man. It was all this trauma of them doing all this shit to pump my stomach and all this sort of stuff. And then I'm out. Wake up 3-4 days later, fucking incapacitated, can't talk. 7 days later, I'm still in ICU, all this sort of stuff. And I've had a lot of experiences like that. So that being said, man, when I was 17, I had to learn a huge skill set all the way up to 22 years later now in how to deal and manage with these things. These are the basic fundamental things that I probably heard back then, but I take very seriously now. I pick up the phone, I get outside of myself, I get outside of the world that's imprisoning me and get to the world out there, which randomly influences me. I then surround myself with people, and I surround myself with people that I respect, that I can be around, that I can connect with, that may also have experiences like myself. In fact, I get my most healing, and really what these groups of men's development excellence and so on are built off of are people that are like-minded people that have walked in my shoes. A lot of those people are people that come around the addiction communities because it's such a prevalent thing with depression and so on and slipping into that. But man, with our MD Excellence group, same thing. Men on the road to living excellent lives in their social, sexual lives, as well as in their professional lives, their personal lives, their relationships, how they drive themselves and their different lifestyles, and how their bodies can be the best representation of themselves. They're going to go through times where they plateau when they're doing everything that they possibly can, yet life gives them nothing and they fall flat on their face, or the life falls on them and smashes them. Man, those are points or you need to be around a group of knowing that that's okay, knowing that those things happen, because community, like I said, we evolve to be around people. That makes everything a lot better. In any case, if you like this, man, if this is something that resonates with you, or even something that might confuse you, but you're going, man, this is somewhat interesting, man, fuck it. These podcasts, what I say, they're secondary to the group. They're secondary to our communities. Click the free stuff link down below. Download our PDFs. Check it out, man. Get a part of our community. Get a part of the Austin Men's Development community. Right now, as I'm recording this on July 27th, 2017, the AMD Plus board is $50 one-time payment. There's also a free board if you can't afford that, but man, that's just a great package. You get a ton of amazing products with the AMD Plus, as well as a board where guys are working it on a daily basis. In fact, in order to be on that board, you have to be active, or else at the end of the month you get kicked off. And you can't come back on. You got to get voted back on. So it's really, really tough. So it's an active board where people are always working on different things on how to better themselves. That's something you can do. That's something that you can do right now to change. So why aren't you doing it? In any case, Steve Mayeda signing off. Give us likes, give us stars, give us all that sort of stuff. Subscribe, be a part of this community. Leave a comment. I'll answer it. Other dudes will answer it. But it's even better when we get on our boards and do it. So do that now. Fucking kick ass at life, because fuck, man, life is fucking awesome. Life is awesome. You have a choice. It might be hard to make now, but fuck, man, it's good. It's good. It's fucking good. And just goddamn get there, or else you're going to regret it one more day. All right. Talk to you soon. Laters.